Reverend A. Powell Davies. Let me tell you why I come to church, Powell says. I come to church and would, whether I was a preacher or not, because I fall below my own standards and need to be constantly brought back to them. It's not enough that I should think about the world and its problems at the level of a newspaper report or a magazine discussion. I must have my own conscience shaped, sharpened, until it goads me to do the most thorough and responsible thinking I am capable of. I must feel again the love I owe my fellow men and women. I must not only hear it, but I must feel it. In church, I do. I need to be reminded that there are things I must do in the world, unselfish things, things undertaken at the level of idealism alone. Workaday enthusiasms are not enough to sustain me. They wear out too soon. I want to experience human nature at its best and to be reminded of its highest possibilities. And this happens to me in church. It may seem as though the same things could be found in solitude, but it does not easily happen to be so. In a congregation, we share each other's spiritual needs and we reinforce each other. And that is why I go to church. I just liked that. I hope it's true. As I said, the sermon begins out of the simple appreciation of the scold, just how do you live with yourself? And hidden in that deep is the deep existential question, just how does one live with themselves? Tweaked by the sort of radical difference in spirit and tone that these identical phrases have, I set off to see what wisdom could come, what insight might reveal itself. It truly was a title in search of a sermon. It's probably not surprising that these two exactly similar but different connotation phrases, a homonym of a question, I guess you could call it, really the scolding and the earnest versions of that took me off in two different directions. It is, after all, the time of the Olympics, and in the spirit of competition, rather than picking one truth, I thought I'd just push ahead with both and see where these two separate tones led me and let the best sermon pick the title, win the title. What emerged was a more unified message than I ever expected. The harder, more judgmental question, just how do you live with yourself, has this tone of, sin implied in it, doesn't it, right? It's a great particular wrong has been done to hear that. Just how do you live with yourself, Carol? And an assumption of original sin behind it, right? And for me, thankfully, gratefully, I really, hearing that and saying that to myself, I can't think of anything so heinous that I've done. But just how do you live yourself, probably for all of us, but for me, it called up more of this moment of self-loathing when I make a mistake that's typical of me, that my face cringes and my head drops a little. It just sort of, I could physically, every time I wrote it, it looks like this. And I expect we have our own version of what that thing is, right? Just how do you live with yourself? For the record, my uhs are much more involved with being hasty, forgetful, a little too ADHD to prioritize what I should be doing, what's more important for what I'm in the middle of. That's my sort of biggest sin, I guess you'd say. Unwilling to break out of my own head and prioritize other feelings is probably my greatest, repeating ugh. So the first thing for others I think of when I think of whatever uhs are yours is to sort of encourage you to be gentle and sort of forgive yourself. And it's funny how easier it is to scold yourself than it is others, right? And I began thinking and reflecting about what could and should be said about accepting yourself and all your imperfections. So here's the message for those of us who are too hard on ourselves. And I kept repeating that hidden wisdom hidden inside that simple Christian teaching, love your neighbor as yourself, is probably the surprising part of that, is loving ourselves as we might our neighbors. So if you've never heard it from me before said to you, Here's the more practical, pragmatic, my version of the love yourself as your neighbor. You're broken. Get used to it. We're all humans together, collectively, by definition of being human, imperfect. Probably uniquely gifted in the way that each of us are perfect, and that we are unified in many ways, but if we are united by nothing, we are all united by the fact that we are limited and vulnerable and a bit befuddled by just what we are doing here in this body on earth and finding ourselves to be who we are. We as a species have collective holes, as in the flute. We as people have our own unique holes. Despite the fact that it's quite likely that Adam and Eve and their snake was a children's story stuck at the front of Genesis, for lack of anywhere else to put it, Augustine, that fella from the 3rd century, is on to something with that idea of original sin. We're not perfect. And it is also true that, like the woman in the flute in the story, because of our own biological limitations and imperfect personal histories, we are broken, cracked, have holes, each in our own way. But mostly, your imperfection is not a personal problem. It is a natural part of existing as a human. Love your neighbor as yourself goes both ways. Although it seems easy and obvious to say this, most of us are tempted to find those imperfections, inclined to see them as parts they should throw away of themselves. But we can't, and maybe we shouldn't. As Fred Small, a minister of Cambridge First Parish and former folk singer, says, we're not inclined to talk, especially to ourselves, about how we're all broken in a way that has a loving forgiveness to it as much as it has a disdain. And because we don't, it's easy to imagine that we all have a personal problem, which we do, that is not general, right? We all have a particular version of a general problem of not being every puzzle piece in a puzzle, right? Lynn is a, fabulous musician, maybe terrible at math. I don't know. So I bet when you think about your limitations, you tend to focus on the way that you are idiotic, forgetful, pick your modern version of your sin, rather than the truth that it's hard to be good or even functional in every way. Our egos tempt us to believe that we can eventually, with enough spit and polish, with enough grit, get rid of that part of ourselves that causes us, or even others, anguish. And feeling inadequate in a way that is far too personal, we defensively spend a lot of energy, all of us, not all of us, but often, posturing our competence for an audience we imagine mostly outside ourselves that isn't really watching, right? We sort of look at ourselves, at least I do, maybe this is just me, but I look at myself and try to improve myself as if everyone else were watching that same story. And I think that when you think about what every religion has the idea that on the other side, through the veil, up in heaven, when you become spirit, when you are happily hunting in the, happy hunting grounds of Valhalla, when you've reached nirvana and that form of extinction, there is peace. And I think whether there's some perfect model on the other side or not to compare life to, we understand, and the wisdom traditions understand, that there's something about us that doesn't work. We lose the fact that life is a gift, and we focus on the fact that we are broken. Imperfection is part of our inheritance, and we all know this rationally, but it's not how we approach it often. The Buddhist psychotherapist Tara Branch calls this unconscious need to prove ourselves the trance of unworthiness. The belief that we, often heard as me, is deficient and unworthy. She writes, it makes it difficult to trust that we're truly loved. convinced that we're not good enough, we can never relax. Maybe this is just my sermon. I don't know. Maybe you don't feel this way. But I know that one of the reasons that I've been single for so much of my life is my own discomfort of being witnessed for a long amount of time up close. So I feel like if I don't let somebody gets that close, only I get to deal with my own unworthiness. And I think that's unhelpful. The late Henry Nouwen, a Catholic priest and Harvard Divinity School professor, refers to this ego as the trap of self-rejection. So I encourage you to digest your brokenness, and once you've digested that, heal your heart with the truth that you are truly worth loving. Because even if you're broken in whatever way you're all broken, and we are, we're so much more unique and beloved than that. So, sit up straight. Sit up straight. You are a marvel. And you can look at it a number of different ways, but both of them are accurate. When you step back and focus not on what's wrong with you, we're either one of two things. We're collectively, and you particularly, are either, by the traditional religious understanding, the beloved creation of God, the pinnacle of a good creator's efforts to create a world of which we are a reasonably high form function of that, or, in evolutionary terms, we are one of the most, if not the most amazing things the universe has ever spun into existence. And you, at the end of that timeline so far, is about the most interesting thing ever spun into existence. You can pick which version of holy you like the best, but sit up straight. Let that sink in for a minute. In general, the most spiritually deep people from all across time have had experiences that have led them to believe, insights that tell us that we, more than have rocks in our head, we rock. Maybe beloved is not the right term for you. Maybe you're more comfortable with ridiculously lucky to have all this genetic legacy we've been handed. Either way works for me. So that answer to the scolding, just how do you live with yourself, is basically to remember how cool and unique you are to begin with. The other more inquisitive, more rational, just how do you live with yourself, to me has an existential kind of answer to it. And I think the first one comes first. You have to love yourself enough to then get on with the task of getting to the work of building the best you that you can be. It's a different question with the same words, calls up a different energy. Focus not on undoing the shame, but really calling us forward. The proper response is not to scold ourselves. The proper response is to actually ask yourself how you really can be the you that is you in the best way. I love these two different truths. I sort of came upon me, and maybe that's not the way I should answer that question, but it's the way I did. See, once you're over the shame of focusing on what you're not, the raw, irrefutable limitation that we are, we can move on. The existentialists who really focus in this tone on our question, each in their own way, offer us the challenge of, instead of spending our lives trying to satisfy what we're deficient as or in the words of Abraham Maslow, move on to become more self-actualized in what you are gifted at. Is this life filled with questions of meaning you will never get answered? Is your life filled with distractions and disabilities and limitations? Both, of course. Hardly a classic existentialist, Jesus, in quotes, I say, is said in the Gospel of Thomas, and I use this all the time, says that if you do not bring forth that which is within you, that which lives within you will kill you. If you do not bring that forth that which is within you, or if you do, it will save you. That balance. So if the best way to forgive yourself for not being perfect is letting yourself be imperfect, then it's time to move on to be the best imperfect, fragile you can be. And the more we love ourselves and ask ourselves to do the only thing we can do well, which is to be our fullest, most authentic self, the less likely we are to find ourselves the subject of that talking head song once in a lifetime, asking ourselves, how did I get here? My God, what have I done? If we love ourselves to recenter our lives around, or more practically, closer to our purposes we feel called to, we make the world more whole by being more unique in our own way. More of what we do will make us happy. If we do that, we will become more focused and probably feel better, more whole, and you will have taken a step forward to ensure the reflective question, just how do I live with myself, is found in becoming more of your own genius. If you don't do these seemingly odd things, go easy on yourself by forgiving yourself for not being every puzzle in the box. It's going to be harder for you to be the puzzle that you can be in the best shape and in the strongest, brightest colors. You'll be more likely to chuckle at the question, just how do you live with yourself, with the only possible answer there is, I don't know, but I'm enjoying trying. It is, after all, our only job, right? Just how do we live with ourselves is, of course, the only job we are here on planet Earth to do. Amen.